It's been a week since my last post, and a few things of note have happened since then. I've been thinking a lot about the cube, and no matter how hard I try, I can't come up with a logical explanation. Something you should know about me is that I'm not at all superstitious. I never grew up in a religious household, and I never really found myself believing in the paranormal. That's probably the reason this cube scares the absolute hell out of me. I've seen plenty of weird stuff in my life. As strange as some of them were, I could always find an explanation that didn't involve the supernatural. For example, I spent about 14 years of my childhood living in New Mexico. One day, when I was 17, my uncle called my dad convinced he had just shot the chupacabra. For those of you who don't know what the chupacabra is, it's basically this cryptid that sucks the blood of goats, chickens, and in some legends, even people. I went with my dad to see the carcass of the beast, and I instantly realized my uncle had actually shot a coyote. An emaciated, mangy, and probably rabid coyote, mind you. However, my uncle wasn't convinced by my skepticism and had a professional analyze the body. Surprise, surprise. It was, in fact, a coyote. Me and my dad never let him live that one down. The cube is not one of those instances. It seemed like for every theory I had about this thing, there was a damning piece of evidence or a looming question that contradicted the idea. I mean, who put it there? Why? How did they remove it and leave no sign that it was even there? Not even an imprint. What was with those voices? I began to consider that maybe I was somehow seeing things until what happened yesterday. I currently work at a hardware store in town as a cashier. It's far from the best job, but I needed to take whatever I could to make money. I was talking to one of my coworkers and a good friend, Devin. He's about 5 inches taller than me, a lot stronger, and has a short brown beard that works well with his hair that he puts into a ponytail while he's working. He does a lot of the manual labor in the store, like operating the machines and lifting heavy objects. Devin's a pretty good guy. He's clever, hardworking, and loves nature almost as much as I do. He would even sometimes go with me to camp at the park. We'd set up a fire, some tents, and just sit around talking about life and telling stories. Devin loved to tell ghost stories around the campfire. I never believed any of the legends he told, but they were still interesting to hear with his narration. He told stories of things like Bigfoot, the Wendigo, skinwalkers, and all that kind of stuff. It's because of this I felt comfortable telling him about the cube I saw without worrying about him laughing in my face. "Damn," he said. "Never heard of anything like that before." I could tell by his expression that he was slightly skeptical of my claim, and reasonably so. I mean, it's not every day someone tells you that they saw a giant white cube in the middle of a forest. However, at the same time, I could tell he wasn't going to completely dismiss it as some kind of hallucination or something. We talked a little longer about the cube. Honestly, I couldn't tell if he was just humoring me or genuinely curious. After a while, he went back to his workstation and I was alone again at the checkout. After about a minute of sitting there and checking my phone, I heard something. It sounded like a very faint buzzing in my ear. It was as if a bee was hovering in place about a foot away from me. My attention was then directed to the screen playing on the live feed on the surveillance camera. As soon as my eyes hit the screen, my heart skipped a beat. There, inches away from me, was the cube. It stood out like a sore thumb on the feed. While everything else was grainy, the cube looked as if it was being filmed with the most advanced camera possible. It looked as if the static that infested the rest of the screen flowed around it. The buzzing in my ears started to rise in volume, and it was becoming unbearable. I stared at the cube for a good 30 seconds, wanting to scream, but I couldn't. Something about this thing brought out the deepest, most primal fear in me. After a few deep breaths, I slowly turned around to see nothing. I began to sweat as I turned to look at the screen again to see if it has disappeared from there as well. After that, I went home without a word. I called in sick the next day. I had to get back to that park. At the dawn of the next morning, I gathered my supplies and got into my car and began my drive to the park. The drive was fairly uneventful until I got within 10 miles of the forest. My radio began to get choppy. After another minute, it cut out completely. I pulled into the main entrance of the park and was stopped by a female park ranger. "Sorry, the park's closed," she said. This was quite odd because I had never had the park closed on me before. "Why?" I asked, trying to sound as nice as possible. The park will likely be open again in a few days, she said, completely ignoring my question. There was something unnatural about the way she spoke. Her voice barely changed in pitch or tone, and her eyes were so fixed on me, and I can't remember if she blinked or not. Her gaze started to make me feel very uncomfortable. The whole situation was simply unnerving, and I could tell she was purposely not telling me information. I decided not to try and push any more than that because I knew I wouldn't get through to her. Plus, she was really creeping the hell out of me, and frankly, I didn't want to deal with her more than I already had to. I said, "Have a good afternoon," and drove off. Through the rearview mirror, I could see the park ranger watching me as I left. I tried to ignore her as I pulled out from the entrance into the highway that took me into the main town. I'm now at a local rest stop, typing this. I'm currently waiting for the sun to go down because I'm going to try to sneak in under the cover of darkness. The staff at the park is clearly hiding something, and I'm sure this godforsaken cube is at the center of all of it. Wish me luck. Thanks for joining us around the campfire. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe below. Also, hit that notification bell to be notified of our new stories as they are posted. If you have a story you'd like to share for narration, submit it via email, and you may be hearing your story next. Our email address is in the description box below. Thank you, and good night.